Very good afternoon, everybody. I'm your host for the session, Yash from IMI. Uh, Welcome to the panel discussion on payments in gaming. And we would like to begin by thanking you all for being a part of Gator 2021, Digital Gaming, the next leap. We would also like to thank our sponsors, our title partner, Games 24/7. We're powered by Apps Flyer in association with Trackier, Platinum Partner OnePlus, Content Delivery Partner Limelight Networks, supported by Invest India and our knowledge partner RedSale. A big thank you to all our sponsors. And without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Girish Menon, partner and head media and entertainment KPMG in India, who will be moderating today's discussion. Joining us today, we also have a distinguished set of business leaders. Mr. Nitin Goel, country manager, Indian subcontinent, Gameloft. Yogesh Gaikwad, director of studios, EXR Interactive. Mr. Anuj Bhansali, head of trust and safety, PhonePe. And Mr. Punit Pawan, business leader, strategic initiatives, CashFree. I would request all delegates to keep posting their questions in the chat box, and the panel will address a selected few at the end of the session. Over to you, Mr. Menon.
Great. Thank you so much, Yash. And hello to everybody, and thanks for taking time out to both to the panelists to joining in this session, as also to the that is very underserved in terms of as a topic of discussion when it comes to gaming, right? Payments is at the core of making IAP successful, and particularly in a market like India, where it's sort of struggled to gain traction in the past. uh, Digital payments is core to making this entire endeavor successful, right? And I think we probably don't spend enough time talking about this, and I think this session hopefully should give us the opportunity to talk to some of the participants in this industry, and we've got representatives both from the studio side as well as the payment side of the ecosystem. And between all of their collective minds, I'm hoping we'll have an engaging discussion around this particular topic. And with that context in mind, let me actually set this up a little bit, and get a quick 1 minute perspective from each of the participants. In terms of the role, maybe Punit, you could help start this conversation off with your perspective.
Girish, we lost you in between.
Yeah, Girish.
I'm so sorry about that. No, so I was just saying that maybe we could just have a quick 1 minute, setup from all of you, just to give us the context of how digital payments have enabled growth in gaming, and particularly on IAPs and subscription models in the last 3-4 years, particularly wallets, UPI, and a whole host of other digital payment options. And maybe Puneet, we can start off with you and then go around the table.
Absolutely, Girish. So let me put my perspective on how digital payment adoption and how the payment side of things digitally have changed on the gaming scene in India. So the first thing is that, of course, when I talk in terms of when a player comes and they try to deposit money for any kind of gaming platform that they go into, and so with the advent of instruments like UPI and wallets, currently we see that the share of UPI deposits has significantly grown, right? And that's primarily because of the push from even from the NPCI or the RBI side, where adoption has been really, really amazing from a user perspective, and also because the kind of ease this offers to make a deposit. You don't have to go through the lengthy process of entering a card number or a OTP. It's very seamless. You are playing on a phone. You can just switch to your other app on the UPI, complete the payment, go back and continue playing. And just one another important perspective before we hand it over to the other folks here is especially on how the other part of the payment happens, which is one is where people use payment, online payment to deposit funds, but also there has to be players who have to withdraw money back to their bank account, right, or UPI ID or wallets. So that is where I think CashFree has also been a pioneer with a product, something like a payout, which actually solves this problem. Unlike earlier scenario where it would ideally take a 2 day or 2 day or 3 day process for a gaming platform to sort of push the money back to the customer's bank account.
Mm-hmm.
With a very automated API driven approach, now it happens that even on a Sunday night or Saturday night, if you put for a withdrawal request, you get the money within 1 or 2 seconds in your bank account. So from a
Right.
user perspective, that's an amazing experience. Also helps build trust on a lot of new segments of gaming and businesses which are coming into market.
Got it. Understand. No, fair. Yogesh, a quick perspective from the studio end on this.
Yeah, so basically, with the advent of digital payments, right, the barrier to entry is reduced. See, speaking on probably PC console side, earlier, if you wanted to buy a game on PC or console, you had to use prepaid cards or even use accounts that were made in a country that were not in India. But with the advent of digital payments, especially UPI, also it has become seamless and much easier to purchase games, and also especially for Gen Z, especially young users who don't have
Mm.
access to instruments like credit
Mm.
cards.
Mm.
Using UPI has become much easier and also has helped in driving growth in terms of both PC, even on mobile. It has become much easier for users to make in-app purchases or microtransactions or subscribe to things because the experience has been pretty smooth.
Right. Understand. Fair enough. Anuj, perspective from PhonePe, and I know, with UPI in particular is something that you've in particular seen a lot of traction on. How is that helped the whole gaming ecosystem grow? And in particular, are there any elements that can be thought of which will maybe which is more suited to the gaming sector in that sense around payments?
Sure. So before I get into that, see, there are primarily three factors. If you look
Mm.
at least in my age group, right, we used to go into the arcade games. You used to take that 10 rupees, 100 rupees, and take those coins, play. So the gaming mindset was always there, right?
Mm.
It's just that three major factors which changed over a period of time.
Mm.
One was around the ease or the mode of payment, right? From a digital mode, earlier it was a pure play net banking or a credit card, debit card, which did not have enough penetration in India.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the second one was the trust factor. Do I trust somebody? At least over there, I was handing over a cash, and now I was getting something in return, and I could dispute right there and then. So the
Mm-hmm.
trust factor in the payment space has now significantly gone up. Third is the revolution around the entire internet and the mobile space in itself, right? So you have 4G, you have a lot of mobile devices, even a low-end device or 5K is powerful enough to run games. I
Yeah.
think those three factored in together have changed the entire ecosystem. So
True.
people got convenient about being on a mobile device itself of playing games. They got convenient about how do I make a payment, let's say from a secure enough app, and that's where probably UPI changed the dynamics, right? Earlier there was a
Mm-hmm.
cost of a transaction. There were barriers to transaction. You would go into a net banking page. They were not optimized for mobile phones. They were clunky enough. The OTPs did not come in. Over here, it's like an intent link which gets fired out. You are inside the app. You just open up your payments app. You make a payment, and you're done. And the most important thing that has happened over a period of time, while as Indians we have bank accounts, right? Almost that's a very good enough number as compared to a credit card or even a debit card out. People have been able to go ahead, use UPI and do microtransactions. So what
Yeah.
UPI fundamentally changed for people is I don't have to worry about doing 1,000 or a 10,000 or a big ticket item, and that is where it was kept as. UPI fundamentally changed that, saying that okay, a 10 rupee or a 50 rupee transaction or a 100 rupee transaction, I could do that with ease. I don't have to worry about it, and I trust the app enough, or how am I making the payment? So I think fundamentally that has changed. So
Got it.
that has definitely given an input towards the gaming side of things, where people have started adopting to that as a methodology. I think we are still in a very, very nascent stage, to be very honest, right? From a payment space, it is still working on some of those things out. We have
Mm.
technically moved away from a credit card architecture, which was for the Western world out,
Yeah.
right? That you are doing a recurring billing, and then at the end of the month you're paying. I think there are a lot of changes that need to happen with recurring payments coming in. You could just set that up. You could set up a mandate, and that friction of payment still goes away today. Even when you have to do that, even that two-factor in, right? So there are a lot of things which are planned up, which will come in. I think we are still in the very, very initial stages of this journey.
Understand. And I think, Anuj, you've touched upon two or three very specific points, and I want to come back to you in a bit. But I don't want to keep Nitin waiting any longer also. Just, Nitin, a quick perspective on an overall basis, and then let's also lead that into the conversation on specifically the last 18 months during the lockdown and the pandemic. How have you seen, while all the industry as a whole has seen a lot of traction around gameplay, around users, user acquisition, user retention, engagement, all those metrics have been doing very well. But what's interesting for me when I was looking at some of the metrics also is the paid models, right? The IAPs have also seen a significant growth during this phase, and I just wanted to get that sense from you as to how do you see this? How has this been in the last 18 months or so, and how has the whole paid models evolved, and what do you think are some of the reasons, for some of this to happen?
Thanks, Girish. Right. So basically, when we look from our perspective, we see one of the core thoughts behind the gaming that we always look at is like, so I try to draw some parallels of the industry, and I generally draw parallels with the FMCG and in the industry in this case, right? And the one thing which comes across very clearly to my mind is when you look at the gaming, the whole experience of purchase is more of an impulse purchase.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes across to the impulse purchase behavior that we are looking at, the convenience and convenience is very critical in terms of the payment process which we need to build across. Right? And over the last decade or so, I have been seeing, like, so globally, while we have we had the enablers in place. Right? So in India, we had limitations which existed, and I'm talking in specific. If I were to look at like the Play Store and the iOS Store in the specific, from the core gaming perspective, over there we had those kind of limiting factors in terms of having that seamless payment possibilities. But over the last few years, I have seen there is a significant progress which has come across over there. Although I still believe, I said there is one thing which is missing is basically wallets over there in that space, which they have some way around for that. But I think it's still not the ideal ideal solution that's there. But yeah, I think once we have that, we can potentially see a significant growth coming across. However, right, so coming specifically to over the last 18-month period, which you actually mentioned about, there is a significant growth that we have seen both in terms of the usage across the games as well as the spends. For us, the heartening aspect is like, so the average spend per user has seen a growth. So basically, we are seeing new users who are actually spending into the games. So which actually gives us a lot of heart in the future potential of monetization through in-app purchases for the Indian market. And just to put across the perspective in terms of like numbers, if you were to ask, we have seen somewhere like 50% growth in terms of our in-app purchases over the last 18 months. And that has been like, there had been a thought, okay, probably it's something which will taper down eventually post the lockdown period is over. But we have seen a sustenance over there. Right? So although I would not say that it's still at the similar levels as we had during the lockdown, but it has actually sustained it to a sizable level, which gives a lot of confidence to us about the potential of the Indian market per se.
Absolutely. No, I understand, and I think that's absolutely right. It's something that we've seen at an overall level for sure in terms of significant growth bump up during the pandemic, and then a drop, but still operating at a much higher new normal as compared to the pre-pandemic levels. So I think that's definitely very heartening to see for the industry. And Yogesh, continuing on to this point, right? Just a perspective from you also. How have you actually seen the IAPs grow over the last 18 months or so? And is there, and like I think Nitin mentioned, because these are all impulse purchases, right? What kind of a role has has digital payments, and particularly frictionless digital payments, helped grow this IAP in this period?
Yeah, so uh, Nitin pointed out, so there has been a growth in both spends as well as users. And especially one point to note for us has been India has not been a big market for us. But however, during the pandemic, we've seen, or rather, we've also done few things due to the increased number of players, like introducing something like trial memberships or even weekly battle passes. So something that is very unique to India or Southeast Asian countries, based on the appetite of users that
Hmm.
they come in, they are engaged and have kind of converted to paid users over time. And though the numbers have declined, but it has been a growth compared to the previous pre-pandemic levels. And
Got it.
definitely with the advent of digital payments, using subscriptions or making payments has become easier. And primarily we used to deal with kids products, MMOs and virtual worlds for kids. So our target audience was essentially kids' parents,
Yeah.
and that is definitely heartening to see that okay, this the subscription model is something that parents are willing to explore, or the audiences are willing to engage with and use it as a mode of payment.
Right. Understand. No, that's perfect. And from this on, let me come back to Anuj and Puneet, and I want to pick on a couple of points that you had raised when you spoke at the beginning, right? I think one of the things that you mentioned, and something that we've seen, and this is not just in gaming, right, but across the board, digital payments have actually gone deep into the country now, right? With wallets and now UPI, it effectively meant that it's no longer those 20 million credit card or debit card guys. It's basically the rest of the population who've come online and started transacting online using wallets and this, right? So one of the things that we wanted to understand was how is this, going into the depth of the country, right? The proportion of tier two towns, tier three towns making online payments, and within all of that, their presence in the gaming ecosystem, right? In terms of more and more tier two, tier three users and gamers are now starting to engage in paying online and engage in IAP models. Just wanted to get that perspective from you. And so that's right. That's one angle. The other angle also is the point on microtransactions, Anuj, you mentioned, right? And I want to link both of these angles, right? One of the reasons also is that UPI has enabled microtransactions in the past. So again, with confidence building, and as you go deeper into the country, people who are first time or limited online users, for them microtransactions are very low risk and high trust way to engage in online payments, right? But again, with with the government sort of announcing 50 rupee cap on microtransactions, what does that mean for this kind of volume of transactions and IPs that we've seen? Just if you can just combine these two perspectives and let me know. And Anuj, we can start with you and then
Sure,
get Puneet's perspective.
sure, absolutely. So Girish, we at PhonePe have already we figured out how we need to democratize this data access. So we started publishing a report called as PhonePe Pulse, and that is more about how the digital transactions are going across. So I'll pick up some numbers from there, right? Uh, the tier two and tier three actually constitute a large, or tier two and below, like they have
Mhm.
constituted a large majority of our transactions.
Yeah.
From a transaction base, if I were to look at, we are actually covering 19,028 pin codes, which is
Mm.
98% of the pin codes in India, right? And you
Mm.
see transactions coming almost from every single pin code out. So that's been a very very drastic change from the initial days where you had the metros and the tier ones, right, which constituted to a large amount of transactions. State-wise, also we have tried to map around, right, different kinds of profiles. What is the percentage of the population which is coming online? And it's heartening to see it is spreading outside of the tier one cities, right? Give you some statistics around. We basically looked into the tier one. So tier one today has closer to 52% of the payments which are coming in the merchant space, right?
Right.
While the trust starts with the P2P transactions out or the recharge will pay, the tier one has almost 52%, which is a merchant transaction. In a tier two, that number is not far behind. It's actually at a 45%, right? It's both
Okay.
offline and offline. And at tier three and beyond, it's closer to 32 to 33% of the transactions which are just happening on the merchant space out. So that's on the digital scale of payments, right? As a growth wise, I think this has tremendously exploded. If I were to compare the Q2 21 to a Q1 2020, we've seen a 2.5x growth in online payments, right? So that's a phenomenal growth at our scale that we are seeing out. Uh, Coming down to the online gaming space, I think that is one space which has tremendously grown out, right? And we specifically see peaks of it around cricket. India is a cricket country, so we've seen. If I were to compare just an April 21 data to a March 21, we have seen a 70% increase in the online gaming and entertainment as a category in itself, right?
Right.
So that's the just the growth of digital payments. The second thing is it just becomes convenient, right? I want to do a subscription for a few days. I want to pay $100. I want to watch a channel. I want to play a game. I think that's what is leading that growth out. So that's on the data side of things, right? How things are
Right.
progressing around.
Understood. Punit, just your perspective on particularly maybe talk a little bit around this whole 50 rupee cap that we've seen recently around UPI payments. Is that actually something that could potentially be a challenge to microtransactions on gaming?
Okay. So, Girish, I would want to first start off by throwing some light that why did that come into picture in the first place,
Right.
right?
Right.
And I mean, eventually, you all would agree that that's been such a positive impact because of which that kind of a capping came into picture. So that
So,
happened in the time of this IPL, right?
hmm,
And the first leg of IPL when it started 2021 in April and May, right? So what happens, and this also sort of in a way also reassures the kind of impact COVID had or pandemic had on the gaming side of things, because
hmm,
volumes grew and then it subsided a bit, but it got stagnant at a much higher level of
hmm,
growth. Right? So the main reason why NPCI came up with a condition like this was because what would happen on the skill-based gaming sites, and I'm talking mostly from a fantasy gaming
hmm,
perspective, right?
hmm,
What would happen is when an IPL game would start off, the last 15 minutes or 20 minutes of the game is when the maximum deposits would happen. And
right.
of course, the majority transactions would get routed via UPI, right? Could be PhonePe, could be a lot of other players. Now, what used to happen? Every bank, when we route transactions from a payment gateway perspective or from a digital payment side, we have certain number of transactions that we can push to a bank, and there is
Hmm,
a certain number of transactions that the bank can process in terms of their, say,
right.
server capacity or their processing capacity, right? Which we call it as a TPS, for example, say transactions per second, right?
Sure.
Now that TPS got so much stressed on the servers for even NPCI that they had
Hmm,
to come back and sort of work with phone pays and aggregators like CashFree and
hmm,
with fantasy clients to ensure that we sort of don't route or limit the UPI transactions above 50 only. That
hmm,
was just to ensure that the transactions still go through, but that kind of a stress does not go on NPCI server during those
hmm.
15-20 minutes slot where it breaks that thing, right? Break the
Got it.
entire chain.
Got it.
So that, I think in a way it's so positive that though the kind of UPI volumes we all have observed growing into trillion number of transactions month on month, quarter on quarter, the kind of growth and with the kind of partnerships, with growing Singapore, with our NPCS UPI stack and all.
Hmm,
But that's the kind of growth we see that. So I see this as a very, very positive impact to a point where NPCI had to take an action like this in during IPL to curtail the kind of volumes that they can sort of sustain. Right.
right.
So I think that's
Got
a
it.
very strong, but I guess I see it eventually going to a point where it would not be a challenge any longer because
Hmm,
probably this was the first time when NPCI also realized the kind of volume they can see while they get prepared for next sort of similar events going further and in future. But yeah, so I mean for me I think it's a very very positive impact from
Understood.
that perspective.
That's an interesting angle, and in some ways you're right. If the volumes and a lot of it triggered through gaming was one of the reasons for NPCI to think about it. It does actually tell you the kind of depth in gaming models that we are starting to see in India, right? And I think that is tremendous to see. Um, Yogesh and Nitin, one angle I also want to explore, and this is something that we've seen work very well in global models, particularly with Tencent. And now in India also, we've started to see with multi-gaming platforms in particular, this whole aspect around tokens or coins or loyalty points, whichever you want to call it, and then which then gets, so you've got a one-time purchase, which then gets, spread out across the multiple games that the platform has to offer. And invariably, this is a combination of RMG, fantasy, non-card RMG, all of that comes together into one platform, right? How do you see, and in a country like India in particular, right, where uh, traditionally we tend to go for value for money models, right? Whether it is, and this is not just about gaming, right? Whether you look at digital media, whether you look at traditional media, or any forms of consumption, invariably the users tend to gravitate towards greater value for money models besides convenience, right? So, do you see these models becoming a mainstay for gaming businesses in India as they evolve? And is that going to be a very relevant model for studios to consider if they want more people to pay for gaming products? Just wanted to get your perspective, and Yogesh, maybe you could start.
Yeah. So, see, traditionally, games, especially deployed through Google Play or Apple, have been, you can say that both of them are walled gardens, basically. So,
Yeah.
sharing of currencies or that
Hmm.
is prohibited at this point of time. But
True.
with the Epic versus Apple lawsuit, things will get interesting. So the fallout
Yeah.
definitely is going to spread, and at that point of time, probably things will look very interesting. See, because
Hmm.
having, like you said, the value for money perspective, one thing of the to note of there for studios is you can do it in a big way if you own the ecosystem, the whole player base. You can retain the players in your own ecosystem, and it also kind of gives you different advantages where you can serve different tastes. Like
Hmm. Hmm.
in India, we are kind of at the cusp of evolution where people started with casual games, moving
Yeah.
on to mid-core and exploring new genres. So if there is a big player who has access to different sort of genres of games, it makes sense for them to have a common coin or token model where they can retain those users on their
Hmm.
own platform. And
Hmm.
also it helps with engagement, re-engagement, cross-platform promotions and things like that. But at this point of time, it's very restricted due to Apple and Google, and similarly also on PC console, wherein the distribution platforms are
Hmm.
prohibitive of
Hmm.
such
Hmm.
practices.
Right.
But
Understood.
with the evolution of new payment modes, and also the restrictions freeing up, it is something definitely a big thing that all studios are keeping their eyes on.
Understand. Fair enough. Nitin, your perspective on this, and I think I just want to pick off on what Yogesh mentioned about this whole Epic Apple thing. And, with this kind of an opening up happening, do you see, therefore, similar multi-gaming opportunities arise for mid-core games and above also? Because right now it's largely in India on the platform side, more casual games, right? But something like, say, a Game Pass or some kind of a model starting to evolve even for mid-core and hardcore games in India outside of the console ecosystem?
Now, so Girish, on this, right? So basically, one point that I want to mention is like, so if you look at the evolution of the
Hmm.
monetization of gaming, there are cues that we get from there, right? So basically, till the time Google and Apple were there in the market, right? So the mobile gaming was a very minuscule component of the overall gaming space. But over the last 1 decade, we have seen a significant growth, and now mobile is bigger collectively than your console and PC. and
True.
and primarily the reasons which I identify behind is like, one is like easier access to the content developers, and second is like the new monetization models which have evolved over the last one decade, right? And that was the big disruption which happened about a decade back, which actually had a positive rub off in the mobile gaming space.
Right.
So that's where I believe, right? So these kind of new monetization mediums, which actually help users, right? So in terms of having great value for money, has a significant potential going forward in future. However, as Yogesh mentioned, right? So the current dynamics of the industry which prevail, right? So are the limiting factors, right? So if you have to actually build this kind of economy on your side, so you need to completely own that ecosystem, right? So and how many players actually have that capability to own that ecosystem, right?
Right.
So in that case, like if you look at from the content publisher perspective, there is a very limited scope, I would say, on his side. It has to be some play on the platform side, and
Got it.
if that evolves somehow, although I also believe it's gonna be a pretty complex thing when it comes across having a common economy across the games, which are actually very different in the way they are designed. Um, could be a sort of challenge, but eventually I think these kind of challenges can be addressed once we have the ecosystem which is fully developed and evolved around it.
Understand. So let me then ask you another question around this angle, right? So while traditionally in India, most payments on mobile side tends to happen through Google or Apple, right? Um, One of the aspects which used to exist in the VAS era much earlier was the whole mobile on deck payment model, right? Where you basically it used to get either be part of your bill or get adjusted in your prepaid products that you would have. That does not seem to have translated as well into the current era of of gaming. And given that still pretty much most of the gaming in India happens on the mobile device, is that an area that you see another mode of reducing friction for payments in India in terms of using mobile operators for some of the payment angles?
Yes, Girish, and we have worked a lot, right? So that was the whole ecosystem which was
Yeah,
being driven at one point in time. The access
true,
all revolved around the operator about
true.
more than a decade back, right? So, but what I see basically the challenges which comes across is like, so if you look at the operator ecosystem, right? So
Hmm.
95% users are on the prepaid,
Yeah.
and one of the biggest fallacies that we have identified over there is like, so you would see almost like 90% of your transactions failing because of insufficient balance. And that
Hmm.
too in a scenario where you are actually talking about microtransactional payments, right? So I'm not talking
Right.
about currently, if you look at the IAPs on the games which are there on Play Store and the iOS Store, I think it's improbable to actually expect those kind of transactions to happen through the carrier billing, and virtually everything would fail, right? So except like few, which is like a postpaid bill connections, right? So over there, so I somehow feel, right? So that medium used to be effective till about a decade back,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. Yeah.
don't seem to have too much of relevance going forward.
Understand. Understand. Fair enough. Yogesh, one other point related to this is also, so while not purely payments, right, but it's also got to do with pricing. One of the things that the digital players in India, right, particularly when you look at OTT, when you look at music and the others, they quickly realized, right, that you cannot have the same pricing what's available globally. You need to have an India specific pricing, and therefore we've seen significant differences even for global brands like Netflix and Amazon in terms of what they charge Indian consumers, right? Whereas leaving aside a few games, most games tend to still have price points which are more comparable with global pricing. And the pricing parity does not seem to have come through in India. Is that something you see as changing and potentially therefore helping to drive IAP more in India? And is there something holding it back? I mean, Just to understand your perspective on that.
Yeah, so see, it also depends on the developers and also the major players in the
Mm.
space. So if you
Mm.
look at the Indian perspective, in the top grossing games, five of them are more or less similar to what the global top grossing games are.
Mm.
So the tastes kind of match, but the
Mm.
amount of money that they make out of India is a minuscule compared to their whole global revenues. So
Mm.
that is one thing that is holding them back. And especially, see, when it comes to free to play,
Yeah.
if you kind of do it as per purchasing parity, a person in a certain geography will get it at a certain price, so that
Yeah.
also kind of leads to a lot of unhappy end customers. And especially with free to play, it also kind of in a way leads to economy imbalance. So basically,
Mm.
right, see, if you can get something, so especially people who have a higher purchasing power will become too powerful versus people who can't pay, so especially
Mm.
on the competitive side. So it
Right.
would lead to imbalance. And especially now in today's world, so we have something called as global matchmaking, so you can play with
Mm.
anybody anywhere in the world. So
Right.
that causes imbalance, or rather skill matchmaking problems, as well as economy imbalance.
Fair point.
And also it also depends on developers, right? Certain developers believe in maintaining high ARPUs, versus some developers believe in actually keeping the ARPUs low but having a larger user base.
Not to use the base.
And two examples of players who are doing it right rather than just reducing the price. So if you take Free Fire and PUBG, those are games specifically built for India, and they are they provide very tailored experiences for Indians. So they
Mm.
have different
Mm.
servers. The pricing is on par with what the Indian consumers' tastes are, and they have studios set up in India.
Mm.
So compared to that, see, if you take a look at Call of Duty, it is among the top grossing game, but it doesn't have any presence in India. So
Right.
for them, the amount of revenues that they make out of Call of Duty in India is minuscule for them to invest in India. And unless you have a team in India that caters to Indian taste and does live ops according to the
Mm.
Indian things,
Mm. Mm.
that kind of makes sense. It doesn't make sense for them. And
Und-
also, if you look at PUBG and Free Fire, they do a lot of price parity versus a lot of local events.
Mm.
So most of the global games that do it, see, you can see a Lunar New Year event in certain games, but when you see it from the India perspective, you don't have any holy specific
Yeah.
event specific sales or things that offer significant value to Indian consumers per se.
Understand. Fair enough. The last point I want to touch upon, and Puneet and Anuj, your perspectives on this, right? Um, the fundamental hypothesis around digital payments revolves around trust, right? And the reason why wallets and UPI was able to scale up and go deeper into the country was because it was able to solve the trust problem, right? Now, when you try to link this to a gaming ecosystem, right? Just wanted to try and get a sense of how real are payment frauds in India, particularly in this kind of a model, and what do you think are some of the checks and balances that are in place to essentially ensure that these kind of things are not a serious concern, and therefore, consumers can continue to go ahead with this. Just wanted to get your perspectives on this, and Puneet, maybe you can start off.
Yeah. So absolutely, Girish. So the point is, when it comes to digital payments, especially for the gaming sector, as one of the aggregators, we have to be very sure that, because there are events of frauds that can
Mm.
happen. Right?
Mm.
So there have to be certain checks and balances that we also follow, because that is in a way also not just a trust for the players from one perspective, but also
Mm.
for the clients that we are serving, right? And
Mm. Mm.
overall also the entire banking system, because we have
Mm.
to liaison with them to sort of support different kind of payment instruments,
Mm.
right? And so some of the checks that we have to do and we do at our end is, for example, let's say if it comes about card transactions, right? We try and ensure at our end we have checks like to do velocity checks when someone punches their card number, or when someone punches their name of the card holder, right? Or when the OTP is being entered, or let's say when, especially on the checkout page, when they try and enter multiple combinations of CVV, right? So there are different placeholders at the time of, say, card payments, where we try to identify if there could be something that we feel could not be right. So because the thing is, this could impact the overall transactional success rate for the platform.
True,
But at
true.
the same time, they are okay to compromise a bit on the success rate if we are able to ensure a higher fraud prevention mechanism for them, right?
Right.
And a lot of times these new age platforms that are coming in, they don't plan and build initially for the fraud that can happen or the risk that can happen, and they largely depend on players like aggregators like CashFree and PhonePe to sort of ensure that this thing we take care of. So more than just digital payment, that also becomes our responsibility also to take care of our partners and all the stakeholders involved into that, right? That is one part. And of course there are ways like, say for example, for UPI payment, Anuj already mentioned in the beginning that we have flows like intent, where unlike a collect request. So most of the UPI fraud that we see happening happens with a collect request, where someone can customize the text, send you a link, you end up paying to someone where you didn't intend to in the name of a gaming transaction, right? So that's where we also sort of prioritize and tell our clients to go ahead with a intent flow on a UPI transaction rather than a collect request. And just
Understood.
one last thing from my side is that since we also work with all gaming clients on the dispersal side of things, wherever there is a payout happening or customer withdraws their winnings from the platform, we also ensure that we have checks. For example, say if Girish had registered at a platform and they want 10,000 rupees, right? So there are compliances like TDS to be paid, right? And you have to give your PAN card before you withdraw. So before withdrawal also happens, we have APIs which helps us validate if you are withdrawing to a UPI ID, does the underlying bank account belong to your name or not?
Right,
If your
right.
bank account withdrawal, does the bank actually belongs to you? If not, we raise a flag to the partner client so they can take a call, and they know that if it is going to someone else whose PAN is not registered, they should not go ahead with that withdrawal. So we do those kinds of stuff to ensure that on the deposit and withdrawal, and of course, I mean, I'll let Anuj also sort of put more perspective and thoughts on this, for all
Got
of
it.
us.
Fair enough. Anuj, just to add on to what Punit said around trust around payments, in the gaming ecosystem.
Sure. So, Girish, as a payment provider, right, it's our responsibility at the end of the day where the payment is going, how secure it is it for the right intended purpose and for the right intended person, right? Uh, Primarily because we are handling the money flows out. And with that, a lot of compliances also come in. With that, a lot of checks and balances also come in terms of not just fraud, but yes, there are angles of even money laundering, right?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, this is one segment which is not completely regulated. So therefore, there are always some of those chances. So there, I think on the fraud side of things, if I will talk, yeah, I do believe that it is a little bit higher in the gaming sector as compared to, let's say, the other sectors. The normal payments are happening. Primarily for a reason that money can go in and as well as come out. Right? So
Yeah.
you could do a deposit, you could maybe play a game, maybe stage a game that was played out, try to get all that money out. So there are ways for fraudsters to actually use that. Within this segment, the way we look at it is, and that's my actually bigger problem on the other side is one is you have registered merchants, right, uh, who are actually on the they're good enough companies, right, who want people to play, and there will be actors or bad players on that who are trying to misuse the system. So we
True.
build controls in terms of measuring their success rates to what is the behavior like, how what kind of devices people are using, etc., and then try to block not just on so velocity is one type of that allocation to different kind of things that we do from a fraud detection system out. So that plays around at the time of payment and at times of sending money to the merchants. The second, which is of a more concern to me, to be very honest, from an ecosystem viewpoint, is you have a lot of these unregistered apps, right? They're not even in the Play Store. they're SMS links. There are people who will go to different APK stores. They will download them, and they either use a P2P mode. It could be a part of a greed. It could be a part of a chance where somebody saying that, hey, I will give you 10,000 credits on this as a particular game, and hence you will get it. And this is where the biggest fear is, that these unregistered entities will actually spoil the market, for not only for the genuine players but for the payment industry as a whole. So that's where we try to be cautious in terms of what are we getting on board on, who are we allowing the transactions to. We do a transaction profiling for each of these guys out, and then try to do that. So from a fraud detection as well as an AML perspective, I think both of them come in very, very strongly for us from the very start.
Understand. Fair enough. I think we are pretty much out of time for today. But I think it's been a very engaging conversation, since I think we've covered a lot of angles today. Talking about how digital payments and UPI and wallets in particular help grow IAPs in India. How during the whole pandemic phase we've seen this grow and now operate at a much higher new normal than what it was before. And also, talk about how trust in payments is critical for all of this to succeed, and for frictionless payments to continue to happen, and how what are the kind of measures that platforms are taking to ensure that this confidence is there in the entire ecosystem for the gamers and all types of other users. So with that, I just want to wrap up for today's session. Thank you so much to all of you for your time and your valuable insights, and I look forward to staying engaged with you. And I hope the audience also has that some interesting takeaways from today's conversation. Right. Thank you so much. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Girish. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for such an engaging discussion today. And a special thanks to our panelists and moderator. And a big thank you to all our attendees who are here with us today, who've helped us make this event what it is. And thank you for the interesting conversation, guys.
Thank
Hope
you.
you guys enjoyed it as much as we did.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.